domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you are about to enter. So help you God.
I do.
Congratulations, Senators. Congratulations. The clerk will call the names of the next group.
Mr. Johnson, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Lee.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you are about to enter? So help you God.
I do.
Congratulations, Senators. Congratulations. Congratulations. Okay, I think we're ready. Yes. The clerk will call the names of the next group.
Mr. Moran, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray.
Raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office you are about to enter, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations, Senators.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Okay. The clerk will call the names of the next group.
Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Schatz.
Okay, you ready? Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office you are about to enter, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations, Senators. Congratulations. Yeah. Let everyone get. Gonna wait until McConnell sits down. The clerk will call the names of the next group.
Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mr. Thune.
You all belong. That's the beauty of our democracy, Chuck. Okay. Please raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office you are about to enter, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations, Senators. Congratulations. The clerk will call the names of the next group.
Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Vance, Mr. Warnock, Mr. Welch.
Oh, you are just the best. Please raise your right hand and repeat after, well, don't repeat after me, but do take this seriously. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which you are about to enter, so help you God?
I do. I do.
Congratulations, Senators. Congratulations. The clerk will call the names of the next group.
Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young,
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which you are about to enter, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations, Senators.
Madam President,
Majority Leader.
I note the absence of a quorum.
The absence of a quorum having been suggested, the clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mr. Braun, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Brown, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Cappuccio, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn,
Yes.
Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst. Your Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Manchin, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Risch, Mr. Romney, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Sass, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Ms. Sinema, Ms. Smith, Ms. Stabenow, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Vance, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden. Mr. Young.
A quorum is present. Under the previous order, the leadership is reserved and the Senate will be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Madam President,
Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent. The Senate proceed to the consideration of Senate Resolution 1, submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report the resolution.
Senate Resolution 1, establishing a committee to inform the President of the United States that a quorum of each House is assembled.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection. Pursuant to Senate Resolution 1, the chair appoints the senator from New York and the senator from Kentucky as a committee to join the committee on the part of the House of Representatives to wait upon the President of the United States and inform him that a quorum is assembled and that the Congress is ready to receive any communication he may be pleased to make.
Madam President,
Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of Senate Resolution 2, submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report the resolution.
Senate Resolution 2, informing the House of Representatives that a quorum of the Senate is assembled.
Objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of Senate Res 3, submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report the resolution.
Senate Resolution 3, to elect Patty Murray, a senator from the state of Washington, to be President pro tempore of the Senate of the United States.
The clerk will report the resolution. The clerk has read the resolution, and is there any objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection, if the senator from Washington will present herself at the desk, I will administer her oath of office. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which you are about to enter, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Feels so good to say those words. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 4, submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report the resolution.
Senate Resolution 4, notifying the President of the United States of the election of a President pro tempore.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of Senate Res 5 submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report the resolution.
Senate Resolution 5, notifying the House of Representatives of the election of a president pro tempore.
Is there objection to proceeding to this measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of Senate Resolution 6 submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report the resolution.
Senate Resolution 6, fixing the hour of daily meeting of the Senate.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I have a resolution at the desk.
The clerk will report the resolution.
Senate Resolution 7, fixing the hour of daily meeting of the Senate.
Is there objection?
Me? I object to further proceeding.
Objection having been heard, the resolution will go over under the rule.
Unanimous consent, the Senate proceed to the consideration of Senate Res 8 submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report the resolution.
Senate Resolution 8, to make effective appointment of Senate legal counsel.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection. Tim, pursuant to Public Law 95-521, appoints Morgan J. Frankel as Senate Legal Counsel for a term of service to expire at the end of the 119th Congress.
Yep.
President Pro Tem, pursuant to Public Law 95-521, appoints Patricia McBrien as Deputy Senate Legal Counsel for a term of service to expire at the end of the 119th Congress.
No to the UCs? No. Okay. This one?
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to and that the motion to reconsider be considered made. No, I do not do that.
Proceed to the consideration of
Consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 9 submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report the resolution.
Senate Resolution 9, to make effective appointment of Deputy Senate Legal Counsel.
Is there an objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I send to the desk on block 11 unanimous consent requests. I ask for their immediate consideration on block. I further ask that the requests be agreed to on block and that they appear separately in the record. Before the chair rules, I would like to point out that these requests are routine and done at the beginning of each new Congress.
Is there an objection to agreeing to the unanimous consent requests on block? Without objection, so ordered.
I'm going to sign in centrally.
Elect from Oklahoma will now present himself at the desk. The chair will administer the oath of office. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you are about to enter, so help you God?
I will.
There is this thing you see in baseball where people get hit in the chest with a ball, and the pitch will be exactly the moment where you
Nothing does. Madam President.
Majority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. May we have some order? Thank you.
The Senate is not in order. Will the senators please take their discussions to the chamber, out of the chamber?
Thank you, Madam President. Now, this is a joyful and celebratory day, but I'd like to begin on a serious note and offer my prayers and best wishes to Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin and his family. What happened last night was one of the most horrifying things.
The Senate is not in order. Will people please take their conversations out of the chamber?
What happened last night was one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen watching football, and I watch a lot of it. And we're all rooting and praying for his recovery. Damar, we're with you every step of the way in spirit. You make us proud. We can't wait to see you up and healthy again soon. Now, Madam President, let me begin by wishing you and all of my colleagues a Happy New Year. It's good to see everyone as we observe this special, joyful, and solemn day. Today marks the beginning of the 118th Congress. It's the start of a new chapter in the grand history of this chamber, a moment for renewal, reflection, rededication. For those going through this process for the first time, days like this can seem overwhelming, almost like the first day of school. But beneath the celebrations and receptions, a solemn truth permeates everything we do today. We're here because the American people have entrusted us to represent their needs in this great body. So today is historic for many reasons. First, let me congratulate all my colleagues from both sides of the aisle who have just been sworn in, especially my newest Democratic colleagues, Peter Welch of Vermont and John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. I commend all of you for this immense honor, and I challenge each of you and myself as a friend and a colleague. I challenge each of you as a friend and a colleague not to let this opportunity go to waste. I will challenge myself for that as well, because ours is truly an awesome responsibility. And I mean awesome in the biblical sense, not in the way my teenage daughters used to say it, but the kind of awe that would cause the angels to tremble before God. This responsibility is indeed awesome. In our hands lie the trust, the wishes, the hopes, and the burdens of the American people. It is a most grave charge, but a rewarding one if done right. I want to recognize another member making history today. My friend from Washington State, Senator Patty Murray, will become the newest President pro tem, the first woman in history of the Senate to hold this title. There is no one I trust more to be third in the line of presidential succession than Senator Murray. She's brilliant, pragmatic, and someone who gets things done in this chamber. Congratulations also to my friend, the Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, on now becoming the longest-serving party leader in the history of this chamber. We have a lot of work together. We have a lot of work ahead of us, so I hope we can find some ways to come together and not succumb to gridlock for the good of this chamber and for the good of our country. Of course, I want to thank all of my Democratic colleagues for trusting me with 2 more years as leader. There's no group I'd rather work with than this amazing caucus. You're not just my colleagues, you're my friends. With only 50 votes, ranging from Joe Manchin to Bernie Sanders, we made history these last 2 years by passing the most ambitious legislative agenda in decades, since at least the Great Society and perhaps the New Deal. All members, whether returning to Congress or retiring, can feel proud about what we've accomplished in the last 2 years. And let's not forget, and I say this in good part to my Republican colleagues, that 5 of our 6 major bills last year were bipartisan. And I'm proud to be making some history of my own today. Today I have the great honor of becoming the longest-serving senator from New York, the first New Yorker ever elected to the Senate 5 times. To every single New Yorker who trusted me with another term as senator, thank you. And my mentor and former colleague, Pat Moynihan, taught me that you have to dream big to properly serve the people of New York. And I've tried to do that every day in office, visiting each of the 62 counties every year, meeting as many people as possible, and listening to as many New Yorkers as I can. My beloved mentor, Senator Moynihan, served 4 terms. So to be elected to a 5th term is humbling, awe-inspiring, and it energizes me to keep going and keep delivering. So thank you, New York, for this honor, and you can be sure that every day I get up in the morning, I will give it my all to fight and deliver for you. But of course, I cannot do it alone. Today, I want to thank all of my staff, whose relentlessness and determination are only matched by their talent and deep love for this country. Though impossible to name all of them, I must single out one in particular, one of the very best, Steve Mann, my Deputy State Director. He came down today to watch me get sworn in as the longest-serving senator from New York. And when I do, Steve Mann will have some history to celebrate on his own as he claims the mantle of the longest-serving Senate staffer I've ever had. He started with me right from the very beginning. Steve is everything you'd want in a staffer: hardworking, loyal, caring, and a Yankee fan. But unfortunately, he's also a Cowboy fan, Not everyone's perfect, as I remind him about the Cowboys. Kidding aside, Steve, a Rensselaer, New York native, took a chance on me years ago when I first ran for office, and he never looked back. Though both of our job titles have evolved over the years, one has remained: friend. To my newly arriving colleagues, I hope all of you one day can have a Steve Mann working with you, and if you're lucky enough, maybe yours too will become a dear friend. Finally, I cannot forget the most important people in my life. Here with me is my wife, Iris, my daughters, Jessica and Allison, Allison's wife, Biz, and he kept quiet during the swearing in. I was very relieved, my 4-year-old grandson, Noah. They are part of my greater family, and they are my biggest supporters, motivators, and the unsung heroes of my life. And though he's no longer with us, I know my dad is looking down, smiling today. We miss him every single day, but I know he's right here with us in spirit. Now, Madam President, now is the time to set our sights on the future. As we begin the 118th Congress, this Senate Democratic majority enters the new year in a stronger position than anyone ever expected. We have a lot of challenges ahead, but this majority is ready to meet them. We will be relentless, flexible, and work with the other side to get things done. It won't be easy moving forward under a divided government, but after everything we've accomplished with an evenly split Senate and a narrowly divided House, there's no reason we can't keep the streak going moving forward. Let's not forget, as I mentioned, 5 of our 6 major bills last year were done on a bipartisan basis. So let me say it again. After everything we've accomplished in an evenly divided Senate and a narrowly divided House, there's no reason both sides can't keep working together for the good of our country, our beloved country. That doesn't mean we'll agree all the time or even much of the time. It doesn't mean we'll ignore our differences or compromise on our values. We won't do that. But party differences do not absolve either side of the need to work together when the good of the country is on the line. If both sides are willing to give it a good faith effort, I'm optimistic we can be successful, far more successful than many might think. After all, Madam President, if you said 2 years ago that a 50-50 Senate would finish as one of the most successful since the Great Society, the naysayers would have said that's crazy talk. They would have said a 50-50 Senate is doomed to languish in gridlock. But let's take a look at everything we accomplished over the last 2 years and be proud of it. With no margin for error, this majority enacted the historic Inflation Reduction Act and confirmed the most diverse collection of judges, 97 in total in American history. With bipartisan support, we enacted a historic infrastructure bill. After decades of trying, both sides passed the first gun safety bill in over 30 years. We approved the CHIPS and Science Act, passed the PACT Act, and stood with our friends in Ukraine. And just a few weeks ago, both sides worked together to enact marriage equality and the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. All of this done in an equally divided Senate. All of this done with a narrowly divided House. So I hope we can continue to get things done, even with a narrowly controlled Republican House. For whoever ends up becoming Speaker of the House, I hope they will find a way to work with us in a productive way this Congress. Senate Democrats are ready to reach across the aisle and across the Capitol to accomplish big things that will benefit all Americans. So to close, Madam President, after everything we've accomplished over the last 2 years, America is stronger, healthier, and better prepared for the future, thanks to the Senate working together. And we must continue. If Republicans are willing to work with us in the new year, they will be met with an open hand. If they are willing to come to the table, we'll sit right down and do the difficult work of legislating for the people. And if they're willing to set their sights on making our country better together, there's no reason why the success of the last 2 years need to end today. There's much that we should be proud of from the 117th Congress. There's much we can be hopeful for in the 118th. Let us therefore begin the work anew, mindful of the challenges to come, but determined without ceasing to reward the trust the American people have placed in us. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Republican leader is recognized.
Last November, my Republican colleagues reelected me to another two-year term serving our conference as leader. The greatest honor of my career is representing the Commonwealth of Kentucky in this chamber and fighting for my fellow Kentuckians. But the second greatest honor is the trust that my fellow Republican senators have placed in me to lead our diverse conference and help them achieve their goals. As I begin my 9th Congress serving my colleagues in this role, I find myself looking back over some of the remarkable statesmen who've come before. Designated party floor leaders have been a feature of the Senate for more than 100 years, and no two have done the job exactly alike. Some notable leaders have built influence through bookish mastery of procedure. For example, Massachusetts Republican Henry Cabot Lodge and West Virginia Democrat Robert Byrd. Other leaders are remembered less for parliamentary wizardry than for tackle football. Joseph Taylor Robinson of Arkansas delivered much of the New Deal through the Senate for FDR, with a lively repertoire that included cutting deals, red-faced rants, pounding his desk, and almost ending up in fisticuffs here on the floor. When Robinson died of a heart attack, Roosevelt's pick to fill the vacancy was Kentucky Senator Alben Barkley. Even with that endorsement, Barkley only won his first election as leader by 1 vote, in part because Senate Democrats worried the president's handpicked man might actually have mixed loyalties. But Barkley won his colleagues' trust. In 1944, when he dramatically resigned during a showdown with the White House over tax policy, his conference reinstalled him on a unanimous vote the very next day. Then there was our late friend and colleague Bob Dole of Kansas, a sharp competitor who excelled both at partisan combat and bipartisan compromise, plus, as we all know, had a wicked sense of humor. The Texas Democrat Lyndon Johnson was a towering interpersonal force and master of relationships. The Ohio Republican Robert Taft had been more introverted and cerebral. He was a master of policy. But each was a strong force and a powerful thorn in the side of the opposite party administrations. Then there have been leaders who rose to the job through lower-key, behind-the-scenes styles. And that, Madam President, is how Senator Michael Joseph Mansfield of Montana became the longest-serving Senate leader in American history until today. The highest-ranking federal official Montana has ever produced wasn't actually born under the big sky. When Mike Mansfield's mother died early, this young son of Irish immigrants was put on a train from New York City to family in Great Falls, Montana. Though Mansfield would later be famous as a Senate leader who didn't bully his colleagues, apparently young Mike first tried a different approach. A brief trial run as a self-appointed schoolyard bully ended when a bigger boy supplied some humility right to his nose. At age 14, standing all of 5 feet 4 inches, he successfully used doctored documents to join the Navy. Soon after, he migrated to the Army instead. And soon after that, the Marines, which took Mansfield to the Philippines and the coast of China. After that, Back in Montana, Mansfield worked in copper mines as a mucker. This was touchy work in a dangerous underground environment with dynamite everywhere and few exit routes. Eventually, Mike left the grueling work to pursue schooling, but not before the mines had taught him enduring lessons about caution and about prudence. First came college, then graduate studies, continuing a fascination with Asia. But Mike soon exchanged the faculty lounge for elected office. He lost his first race to represent Montana's 1st District in 1940. But he won both the primary and the general in 1942 after the incumbent Republican Jeanette Rankin had cast the only vote against war with Japan after Pearl Harbor. The war gave Congress' newest Asia expert immediate relevance. Speaker Sam Rayburn made sure he landed on the Foreign Affairs Committee. NBC invited Congressman Mansfield to deliver a broadcast lecture on events in Asia. Soon, the Roosevelt White House named him the president's personal envoy to wartime China. A decade later, 5 terms in, Representative Mansfield was a trusted foreign policy hand and a proven fighter for Montana. He traveled to Asia multiple times. He served as a UN delegate. President Truman offered to nominate Mansfield to a State Department job, but Mansfield was eyeing a different kind of promotion. In 1952, he beat Montana's incumbent Republican senator by a few thousand votes and began a Senate tenure that would span nearly a quarter century. From his freshman seat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Mansfield spent the 1950s as the Senate's most frequent traveler to the increasingly pivotal region of Indochina, what we'd soon be calling Vietnam. Even during the Republican Eisenhower administration, the Montana Democrat had great influence. He was an early voice calling for more and faster shipments of military aid to the anti-communist cause. And at least one historian argues that without Mansfield's personal intervention, the U.S. might well have pulled the plug on supporting Diem and conceded Vietnam to the communists as early as the mid-1950s, avoiding the entire war. It took Mansfield's colleagues little time to identify another use for these diplomatic talents closer to home. After the previous Democratic whip, Earl Clements of Kentucky, narrowly lost re-election in 1956, Majority Leader Lyndon Johnson needed a new number 2. He eventually turned to the respected first-termer from Montana. Mansfield later remembered how it happened. He said, Lyndon insisted I had to take it because I was the least objectionable to most of the Democratic senators. It's not actually a flattering argument, but after several meetings, I finally lost my resolve against becoming whip. Now, LBJ was not looking to devolve any real power to his lieutenant. The record suggests that Johnson's famous pit bull staffer, Bobby Baker, did more threatening, horse trading, and whipping of senators than did Mansfield. Mostly, the senator kept investing in his twin passions, Montana and Asia. But his colleagues grew in appreciation for the traits that Mansfield offered the caucus that LBJ did not: a calm presence, a collaborative style, a listening ear. When Mansfield's colleagues, Kennedy and Johnson, won the 1960 election, both JFK and LBJ wanted Mansfield for leader. But there was drama right from the start. Johnson insisted that Senate Democrats begin the new Congress by voting on a resolution to let him chair the Democratic caucus, as if he had never left. Well, the debate was unexpectedly fierce. The no vote was surprisingly large. Even though the resolution carried, the episode was a clear rebuke. LBJ's former colleagues wanted to turn the page. So Mike Mansfield would be leader not just in name, but in reality. So the shift from a boisterous, high-drama leader to a lower-key, more business-like floor manager rippled through the institution. Johnson had deliberately run a melodramatic and unpredictable Senate. Mansfield set out to make things more predictable and formal. Instead of surprise late-night sessions and unpredictable recesses, senators got a set schedule. Instead of micromanaging, the majority leader was actually laissez-faire. President Kennedy's cabinet quickly learned they could meet with the majority leader all they liked, but he wouldn't get ahead of his members. He'd listen politely and refer them to the appropriate chairman. When snafus stalled the Senate floor, Mansfield's first problem-solving tactic was to try simply doing nothing. One biographer marvels at Mansfield's awesome, monumental, fearsome, incredible patience. He would sit stiffly erect at his desk on the Senate floor hour after hour, and sometimes day after day. Leader Mansfield prioritized treating members equally. Apparently, he never even took a position in the races that determined his own whip. In one small but telling touch, Mansfield made sure the Senate's only two women members, Margaret Chase Smith and Maureen Neuberger, got a pair of plum offices that shared a private restroom. In the Mansfield Senate, proceedings became more orderly, less theatrical. Crucial work migrated out of hallway confrontations and hideaway handshakes and into hearing rooms and committee offices. The Senate was less defined by top-down dramatics than by bills and priorities actually percolating upward. A diligent, low-key leadership style from a serious, diligent, low-key person. As one historian puts it, this insistence on being last rather than first, the servant and not the suzerain of the Senate, fitted his personality just like a comfortable suit. Now, not all senators welcomed the change, especially during the Kennedy years, when some of his party's bold priorities stalled under filibusters. Some of Mansfield's own members openly criticized him and his comparatively hands-off approach. Mansfield, however, stood firm. He prepared a defiant speech, doubling down on his faith in an orderly process and a collegial Senate. Remarkably, literally minutes before this big speech was to be announced, President Kennedy was shot in Dallas. Mansfield's remarks ended up slipped into the record with little fanfare. Of course, thereafter, a variety of factors made the Johnson presidency a fruitful time for major legislation. From the Civil Rights Act to the Voting Rights Act to Medicare and the rest of the Great Society. And Mansfield senators remained productive. Later, the Nixon administration and Democrats in Congress passed a thick stack of bipartisan policies. Some critics of Mansfield argued that the majority leader was not the direct driving force, that he contented himself with the modest task of keeping the Senate machinery oiled, while other people with stronger and clearer visions championed particular outcomes. However, it's worth noting Mansfield himself would have seen that statement actually as a badge of honor. And really, the caricature of a totally hands-off, almost agnostic leader is simply not accurate. Mansfield was, in fact, a canny strategist who knew how to rally his conference. He knew when to go to battle and when to coordinate with his counterpart, Everett Dirksen. In short, he knew how to work the Senate. Even when a supermajority of senators stood ready to pass the Civil Rights Act in early 1984, it took Mansfield's personal field generalship to actually get it accomplished. On the front end, his crafty moves kept the bill from dying an early death in Senator Eastland's hostile Judiciary Committee. On the back end, they stopped the final filibuster and, in between, thwarted all the creative stall tactics without blowing up the institution. But it's certainly true that overall, Mansfield did not view and did not treat the Senate as a mere means to policy ends he favored. Yes, the former history teacher was a Democrat. He did want particular results, and he often got them. But he seems to have felt the most valuable end was the institution of the Senate itself, its processes and debates, its traditions, its structures, and all 100 of its members. He saw his job as facilitating the Senate as a whole, working its will and not just working his will. Again, this unusually neutral style came with costs. For example, LBJ was convinced Mansfield could have jammed through the Civil Rights Act actually earlier if he'd played harder ball with the Southerners. Earlier, JFK had grown exasperated with his friend's patient handling of Dirksen, while Republicans slow-walked Kennedy's nuclear test ban treaty. But take note, in both cases, the priorities did eventually pass. And they probably became law with broader and deeper support because Mansfield allowed members more time, more space, and face saving. With regard to Asia, even when Mansfield's historic run in the Senate finally ended, his service on the international stage did not. Shortly after he departed this chamber, President Carter nominated him to be our ambassador to Japan. His performance was so strong that President Reagan asked him to stay on. He served in that role for 11 years, from longest-serving Senate leader to longest-serving Japanese ambassador. Mansfield's decades of work on Asia could fill a separate speech. But it's worth noting one time where his approach to the job of leader directly shaped his work in the region. I mentioned how some historians see Mansfield's aggressive emphasis on Vietnam during the Eisenhower period as a key tipping point toward eventual war. But as early as 1962, Mansfield's learned perspective had him deeply worried about the direction of our involvement in Vietnam. Where he had spent the 50s lobbying for more and faster aid, he spent the 60s sounding alarms. But while there were some public statements, Mansfield remained measured and discreet and reserved his sharpest warnings for a long string of private memorandums that he sent down to the White House. Some historians feel that Mansfield should have engineered a more public, more dramatic break with the Johnson administration if he was so certain we were marching into a quagmire. Some Democratic senators were publicly assailing Johnson's Vietnam policies. But Majority Leader Mansfield decided against making a high-profile public break with the president of his own party on foreign policy. Clearly, Mike Mansfield was a complex and fascinating Senate leader for reasons far beyond his longevity. The scholarly Montanan was not an exciting idealist who transformed our national discourse. nor was he a policy entrepreneur who brought to the leader's role his own sweeping wish list of federal programs. Mansfield made a huge impact through a different road by viewing the role of leader as serving others. Well, that and the fact that he always enjoyed big, stable majorities on his side, often well in excess of 60 votes, helped as well. In the Mansfield model, serving his caucus meant listening to his members, supporting them in their goals, and helping facilitate the victories his parties wanted out of the spotlight. And he also sought to serve the Senate as a whole. He got things done without blowing up bedrock. He mostly defended the Senate's idiosyncrasies, traditions, and pace, rather than trying to tear them down. He erred on the side of empowering his colleagues rather than trying to dominate them. Prudence over performability. Discussion over dictatorship. And a winning record on his party's key priorities without attacking the institution to do it. A quintessentially Senate record from one of the quintessential Senate characters in our history. What a path from mucking in the Butte copper mines to serving 16 years as Senate leader and advising 9 consecutive presidents as a seasoned statesman. And what a testament to our great country that such a path was possible. It's been my honor to remember my distinguished predecessor this afternoon.